Well, it's once again that wonderful time of the year between Christmas and Halloween in which the lazy people have yet to take down their Halloween decorations and the enthusiastic people have already put up their Christmas ones, leading to a wonderful mixture between naughty and nice. Just as we've done for the previous two Spookmases, we're going to celebrate this naturally occurring juxtaposition by having a look at 5 spooky-themed Christmas movies. So, let's begin!
For the previous 2 years, I began the Spookmas special by having a look at an installment of the Silent Night Deadly Night franchise, and not wanting to break tradition, I wanted to begin this one by doing the same thing. Although apparently it was rather difficult to do so this year. Grin kept on harking on at me about how difficult it was to find the movie to download, stream, purchase online, or buy as a DVD. And so while he was getting all stressed about that technical stuff, I simply went on down to my local video store and of course found a copy of it quite easily.
And so here it is. So let's pop it in and see how the film is.
Silent Night Deadly Night 3, or alternatively, Silent Night Deadly Night Better Watch Out 3, or as the title actually comes in the movie, Better Watch Out 3, Silent Night Deadly Night is the third installment of the Silent Night Deadly Night franchise. Much like most ongoing horror franchises, this one has really lost focus and is pretty much unrecognizable compared to the first installment of the series. We are just like Friday the 13th now following a family member which began in the second installment, and despite the franchise's original beginning in a psychological terror, is now following some sort of unstoppable zombie killing machine. Also continuing the comparison with Friday the 13th's ongoing descent into madness, this series too with this installment has for some reason decided to introduce psychics to the story, despite the fact that the previous 2 installments were not supernatural in nature and were pretty grounded. Despite the added complexity of magic, the storyline of Silent Night Deadly Night 3 is fairly simple. Ricky Cordwell, the killer from the previous film, who is the brother of Billy, the killer from the original film, has been coaxed out of the coma that he was apparently put in at the end of the previous film by a psychic who he now shares a psychic link to, and so obviously wants to kill her and everyone she's around. Oh, and of course, it just so happens to be Christmas time again. The film is neither terrible nor is it fantastic. It's definitely better than Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2, which was utter garbage, and was 95% flashback to the first film, but it is probably not quite as good as Silent Night Deadly Night the first. The main downside to this film is that unlike the previous 2 films, the killer is entirely mute, and so you don't really find yourself too invested in him. It really doesn't take any time to explain his motive, but instead quite literally chooses to fall back on the because magic excuse. The film takes no time to build up his personality, and since the previous installment, Silent Night Deadly Night Part 2, was so very forgettable, I really don't remember what they told us about him in that one, and I'm sure as hell not going to sit down and watch it a second time. And then moving past the killer to the victims, they're all just spiteful, petty people, and so it's very difficult to care about them either. This made it really feel like you had no stakes in the movie, because unlike the later Friday the 13th films, you weren't rooting for the killer to actually succeed, and unlike most slasher films, you really didn't care about the outcome for the victims. But undoubtedly, the biggest disappointment in this film is that at no point does the killer adopt the Santa Claus outfit of the previous 2 films. I'm really not sure why they did this. The Santa Claus killer gimmick had at this point become pretty much synonymous with the Silent Night Deadly Night franchise, and it's not like the story just didn't give the character a chance to adopt it. At the start of the film, he even kills a gentleman dressed as Santa Claus as his very first victim in the movie. Instead, he just walks around with his brain exposed as if he's Lord Zed, which, props to the props department, looks absolutely fantastic, but it's just not Christmassy. Overall, this film is lacking the psychological element that made Silent Night Deadly Night 1 so good, and is also lacking the Santa Claus outfit, so while I do say that it is better than Silent Night Deadly Night 2, I really don't suggest it over Silent Night Deadly Night 1, and it's definitely not required viewing. So let's move straight along to the next movie. The second movie we're having a look at today has a very similar title to a film we looked at last Spookmas, in that it uses the exact same pun in reference to the exact same thing. Although past the title, Christmas Sleighs really doesn't hold that many similarities to Santa's Sleigh. In fact, in actuality, it's a lot closer to Black Christmas than anything else. Its plot is fairly generic and not really much to write home about, but it is an independent film, so I'm willing to give it a bit of leeway. The story follows a group of girls and some of their boyfriends who are spending their Christmas on a getaway in a not-so-secluded Scottish cabin. However, unbeknownst to them, there has recently been a prison break from a nearby asylum for the criminally insane, and it just so happens that one of the escapees is a murderer who is known for dressing up as Santa Claus and killing random people for no reason provided other than the fact that he's insane, which I'm actually okay with. The only reason I found it disappointing in Silent Night Deadly Night Part 3 is because that particular movie spawns from a franchise that has a history of explaining the psychology behind the killer. It's not really necessary for your standard slasher flick, especially when you're following the potential victims rather than the killer himself. Oh, so I must point out that in a very similar scene to Silent Night Deadly Night Part 3, this film actually took the time to give its killer who dresses as Santa a Santa outfit, which he then dressed in while doing subsequent killings as Santa. I'm really not sure why Silent Night Deadly Night Part 3 had so much trouble doing this. It's pretty much the exact same scene except for the fact that Christmas Sleighs actually takes it to its logical conclusion and gives its killer the Christmassy outfit that this festive film demands. The movie is fairly slow-paced, which actually surprised me a fair bit because it is a modern film coming out in 2015. This is definitely not a bad thing. In actuality, they actually kind of nailed the pacing, and it felt quite a lot like a classic slasher film from the early 80s. It was actually somewhat refreshing to see a horror film actually take the time to build up the tension and establish the characters before getting down into the nitty-gritty gory violence. Overall, Christmas Sleighs is an enjoyable festive slasher film with some memorable deaths and some truly disturbing scenes. The only downside to the movie is that it is a little bit too long, or more specifically 20 minutes too long, or most specifically 2 scenes too long, because the first and last scene of the movie are really terrible, add nothing to the plot, and really just ruin the ending and beginning of the movie. The first scene is entirely pointless because it does nothing but try to establish the Santa Claus killer as a dangerously insane killing machine, which is completely unnecessary because that's all he does throughout the entire movie, so I think we could have probably picked it up and understood it in these scenes later in which he's killing people while dressed as Santa Claus. And now I'm going to be talking about the last 7 minutes of the film, so if you don't want that spoiled for you, skip to whatever time is listed on the screen right now, which will take you to talking about the next movie, and avoid what I'm about to say right now. So with the spoilers fairly warned, the last 7 minutes of the movie make absolutely no sense and are completely mind-boggling. It feels like it was written by someone who not only did not work on the movie, but also did not even see it. You see, just before going into the end scene absurdities, the last girl standing has managed to survive the night and is being let out by her boyfriend. It's emotional, somber, bloody, and has music playing that sets the scene perfectly, and this is where they should have ended the film. Oh god, why did they not end the film here? It would have been perfect. But they didn't, and it wasn't. The very next scene that follows has the last girl standing taking a bath in what is presumably her boyfriend's apartment. Her bloodied clothes are still in the scene, and you start to wonder, did she not go to the hospital? Did she even call the police? What's going on here? To add further to the confusion, we know from the start of the film that the holiday shack they were staying in was a fairly long way away. They mention how nice it is to go away for the holidays, they mention how nice Scotland is, and they show us at the start of the movie a van driving them there, so it's clearly not just down the road for them. And the idea that the boyfriend came to the shack which was full of dead bodies and found his girlfriend crying in blood and didn't call the police or go to the hospital but instead just drove her all the way home from Scotland is just ridiculous. It's a hard pill to swallow. And then our theory about her boyfriend doing this is all but confirmed when the police arrive and arrest her for the murder of all of her friends, which I guess is a fair enough thing to suspect her of because rather than going to the police and reporting the incident, she instead drove all the way home from Scotland and took a bath. And then we're shown what almost could have recovered this absurd ending as we see the last girl standing in a padded cell freaking out and yelling that it wasn't her, and while this scene was playing I assumed that it was a time jump and we were being shown that despite all of her struggle and her managing to survive the onslaught, the wrongful accusation against her has led her to a life in the asylum. This would have been an okay ending, still not as good as ending it earlier, and the ridiculous leaving the crime scene in Scotland thing would have still been really quite dumb, but it would have still been a powerful ending that I could have gotten behind. But it gets worse. You see that it turns out that it's not actually a time jump, but instead is pretty much immediately after her arrest as we're taken to the police station and it's reported that they found the killer, it's the last girl standing, and she had previously broken out of the insane asylum. We know for a fact this isn't true because we're shown at the start of the movie before the asylum breakout, her in the van with her friends, and throughout the entire movie, dialogue exposition and character development tells us that she's a longtime friend of these characters, has a boyfriend, the one shown in the previous scene, and is going to university. So I'm really not sure what the last scene in this movie is trying to tell us. Do they just not keep records at this asylum? Because surely they should know that this person was never a patient before. And if they do keep records, then how did they make this blunder? Are they confusing her with the actual killer? Because that doesn't make sense either, because they look nothing alike. Really, the last 7 minutes of this film are completely inconceivable. I don't know how they wrote it, and I don't know how they screwed it up so badly. And to add further fuel to the dumpster fire that is the last 7 minutes of this movie, the scenes are shown out of order, with the scene of her in the asylum freaking out clearly timestamped as the 26th of December, and then the scene that follows being the police officers talking about how they finally gotten her and wishing each other a Merry Christmas. So I suppose what I'm saying is if you want to check out Christmas Sleigh, definitely do so, but skip the first 12 minutes of the film and the last 9 because they do nothing but confuse the plot and really take away from the movie. And with that said, let's move straight along to the third movie, Dismembering Christmas, whose title is a play on the Christmas novel titled Remembering Christmas, so points for originality and good job not making another sleigh pun. As this movie started, I went into it with honestly pretty low expectations, not helped along by the fact that you see the snow effect in the background of the opening credits actually loop. On top of this, the first 20 minutes of the movie has some really bad sound issues, and there are some really amateur-looking shot choices. But at the 20-minute mark, when nighttime begins to descend, it really does pick up in quality and entertainment value. There's a really cool and well-done long shot, a really unsettling nighttime murder scene, a sledding death, which we've seen before in Silent Night, Deadly Night, and a death by Christmas tree ornament, which I think is the first time I've seen that in any Christmas horror film so far, so points for that one. The only real downside to the entire movie, aside from the earlier mentioned quality issues at the very beginning, is that the killer ends up going down pretty darn easily towards the end, making me wonder just how they were capable of killing so very many people. But aside from that, it's a genuinely tense slasher film with some pretty horrific deaths and some very unsettling moments. So if you're looking for a good slasher film this Spookmas, I've gotta say I do actually suggest you check out Dismembering Christmas. It's well worth the watch if you're into the genre. Now, the fourth movie we're having a look at in this year's Spookmas is one that I don't have a great deal to say about. It's technically not even a horror movie, as its genre is far closer to a detective film or a crime movie. The film is not exactly of high quality, it's very boring, extremely dated, and it's one of those mysteries in which there's not much mystery because you guess the person who's responsible for the murders the first time you ever see them in the movie. And on top of that, it spends far too much time exploring the wrong characters who have no real relations to the killer, and so when they reveal their supposed big twist, it has absolutely no impact. So why am I bothering talking about it, and why have I bothered to include it in this year's Spookmas? Well, firstly, it is in fact following a serial killer, so I would say that at least places it on the fringe of being a horror movie. And secondly, because the target of the killings is people dressed as Santa Claus, which I couldn't help but chuckle at. I know that sounds dark, but hear it from this perspective. I've been watching for the last 2 Christmases movies where, more often than not, the killer is a dude dressed as Santa Claus, and I couldn't help but thinking, where was this guy during Silent Night, Deadly Night 1 and 2, but not 3 sadly, Christmas Evil, Rare Exports, Santa Sleighs, and Christmas Sleigh? He could have put his murdering to use and saved a lot of lives. But alas, he did unfortunately not. And really, even more unfortunately, that musing is pretty much the only thing worth mentioning about this movie. It was entirely boring, and I really don't recommend it. So with that said, let's move straight along to the final Spookmas movie we're looking at this Spookmas, which is none other than A Cadaver Christmas, which is a zombie movie with style and humor very similar to Robert Rodriguez's Planet Terror, although I think I actually enjoyed A Cadaver Christmas more than Planet Terror, which is definitely a huge compliment because Planet Terror is one of my favorite zombie movies. The story follows a janitor, a disgraced police officer, a drunk, and a bartender as they attempt to quell a zombie outbreak in a local university. It's funny, it's action-packed, it's full of gore, it's great to look at, it doesn't skimp on the festivities, and overall, it's an extremely enjoyable holiday movie to watch. I really cannot rave about this movie enough, and as far as most enjoyable horror Christmas movies go, I would say it's right up there for me with Santa's Sleighs. The film is, as you might well imagine from me saying that it's a lot like Planet Terror, utterly ridiculous. So if you're looking for a sensible, down-to-earth zombie movie, this is definitely not the one for you. But if you enjoy Rodriguez and Tarantino's grindhouse films, then this is definitely going to be up your alley. It was very clearly either inspired by the grindhouse films or the same things that Rodriguez himself was inspired by. So if you're looking for an absolutely fantastic zombie movie to watch this Spookmas, I highly suggest you head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of A Cadaver Christmas. As far as the movies I've looked at this Spookmas, it definitely wins out.
And so if any of these spooky Christmas themed films that I've had a look at so far today have tickled your fancy, then I highly suggest you head down to your local video store and check them out. And if you're still looking for some more suggestions, as I said at the start of this video, this is the third year running that we've done this. So feel free to click on the Spookmas playlist that we've got here to check out 10 more of the spooky Christmas themed reviews. And that's all. So I'll be seeing you later.